Hello, everyone. Tonight, we are standing in the middle of a baking red desert, and something just caught your eye. It's not a skeleton or a skull or some romanticized chunk of fossilized thunder lizard. No, it's a footprint. Just one. No bigger than a coin. Almost cute. Except this tiny indent in the stone might belong to the greatest ruler a continent ever knew. Not a massive beast, not a spike-tailed nightmare, but a little lizard with more hustle than half of Hollywood. And here's the kicker, you probably won't survive. You're too slow, too tall, too warm, and your instincts, frankly, are garbage compared to the lightning-quick panic of this ancient creature. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where and when in the world you're listening from. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's get started tonight. You kneel beside the track. The wind picks up a grainy moan across the sandstone, but you're already ignoring it. Your fingers brush the print again. 3 toes, slender, each ending in a slight claw mark. A 4th toe, smaller, presses toward the inside. It's not a bird, it's older than birds. It's not a crocodile either, though some ancestor scent lingers there. You're staring at the calling card of a creature who ran this land long before anyone imagined a king of the dinosaurs. The stone holds more than this one print. A trail dances across the rock face, darting, stalling, looping back on itself. Not a chase, a performance. This wasn't a creature fleeing. This was a creature flaunting, confident, fast, territorial, like someone who knew no one could touch them, and that included giants. At roughly 30 centimeters long, including the tail, you could fit one of these in your jacket pocket, assuming you didn't value your fingers. Its name still debated because we keep finding pieces with something like Saltopus, or maybe a close cousin. Some think it wasn't even a true dinosaur. Others say it was the first of them. Historians still debate whether the entire group we call dinosaurs spun out from creatures like this, or whether it was just a shared design trend like flared jeans in the 70s. But one thing's certain, around 230 million years ago in the late Triassic, this tiny reptile showed up and decided somehow to act like it owned the place. It helped that there wasn't a whole lot around to argue. Most land animals were smallish, big amphibians, odd crocodilian relatives, insects the size of saucers, and mammals your weirdly adorable ancestors were more or less glorified shrews, nothing that could match this little runner's speed, vision, or balance. That balance, by the way, was ridiculous. Imagine a kid balancing a broomstick vertically in one hand while sprinting downhill. Now, add claws, and the uncanny ability to pivot at full speed without losing momentum. That was its life. It probably didn't walk much. It zipped, skittered, hopped, danced, laughed silently at gravity and physics. And it's not just what it did, it's where it did it. This continent Pangaea was still mostly stuck together in one megamass. And in the southern chunk we now call South America, Africa, and parts of Antarctica, things were dry, hot, and weird. Forests hugged the rivers, the rest open plains, volcanic flats, and sweltering basins that baked anything foolish enough to sunbathe. That's where your new friend thrived? Because while everyone else was lumbering through ferns or hiding in burrows, as this little emperor lived out loud. In the heat, in the open, hunting bugs, stealing eggs, dodging shadows. Maybe even barking at things 20 times its size. You wouldn't put it past them. And its vision, oh, you'd better believe it had vision. Massive eye sockets for the skull size, binocular depth, movement tracking. Probably color vision too, which means it wasn't just surviving, it was noticing, displaying, judging, picking fights with rivals over glances and struts. One fossil even suggests it had little quill-like structures, primitive proto-feathers, or display fibers. Not for flying, but for flaunting. Picture a tiny, upright, feather-dusted menace doing circles around a larger, confused reptile. Odd fact for the day, paleontologists once found fossilized lizard poop arranged in a pattern near what may have been a nesting ground. Not from this exact species, but possibly a cousin. Was it a warning? A defense perimeter decoration? Nobody knows. But you won't forget that image now, will you? There's no skeleton here, just the trackway. The bones dissolve fast in this kind of sandstone. But sometimes the absence of a body tells a louder story. This thing was too fast to die in place. It didn't get caught often. That's part of why it ruled. Not because it killed everything, because it avoided being killed. It broke the rules of prehistoric drama by never standing still long enough to become a tragedy. Even now, as you step back, the desert feels a little less still. The idea that something so small could leave such a bold legacy, it changes you. It whispers that power isn't always loud, and that domination doesn't always wear teeth the size of bananas. Somewhere nearby, a bird cries. It doesn't know it's descended from something that looked like this, but you do, and suddenly the shadow of that tiny tyrant stretches a little longer across the land. You crouch lower, tilting your head so the light hits the stone just right. There's another track set this time, almost missed under a thin layer of dust. The stride is long for something so small. Left, right, left. Each print lightly pressed into ancient mud that hardened into memory. You follow it with your eyes, imagining the little lizard darting along a forest's edge or across a dry floodplain, nerves wired for everything and nothing at once. This is what the continent looked like before the kings arrived. No towering theropods, no horned frills or sail-backed nightmares. Just a world of silence and twitching survival. No rulers, no crowns, only opportunity, and the creatures who moved fast enough to claim it. Pangaea wasn't exactly paradise. It was raw, violent. A sun-blasted sheet of land stretching from equator to pole, cracked by faults and volcanoes, riddled with shallow seas and fissures that would one day become oceans. Back then, it was all connected, and that meant anything fast could go anywhere. If you could outrun the heat, the floods, and the jaws, you could stake out your own miniature kingdom. You spot the shimmer of heat above the stone, and imagine the landscape pulsing with primitive life. Ferns with fronds like lace umbrellas. Cycads that look like something between a pineapple and an explosion. Dragonflies as wide as your hand. But what dominates this scene, what holds the camera if you're shooting a nature doc, is movement. Blurs. Shadows that don't stay shadows for long. Things that flash between moments. Your little tyrant wasn't alone. The continent teemed with small-bodied reptiles experimenting with survival like a dorm full of hyperactive inventors. Some glided, some burrowed. Some had armor, some could mimic plant stalks. And in this mess of trial and error, one design, the lightly built bipedal lizard, started to win more often than it lost. It wasn't about size. It was about agility. You can feel it in the spacing of the prints, tight, reactive, almost musical. Something that could shift gears mid-stride. This wasn't a creature that waited for danger. It smelled it coming 3 thoughts ahead. Maybe even enjoyed the thrill of the near miss. Historians still debate whether early theropods were actually communal hunters or just happened to scavenge near each other. But evidence shows some of them, like Eoraptor or Herrerasaurus, overlapped with your little lizard's timeline, and their teeth tell stories about meat, not friendship. Still, the continent wasn't empty. It was just quiet in ways modern ecosystems aren't. The predators didn't scream. The prey didn't panic in mobs. Everyone was just on edge. You'd hear the buzz of insects, the rustle of underbrush, the sudden snap of a twig, and then nothing. You move forward, following the trail toward a cluster of petrified roots. Once a tree, now a curl of mineral veins. Something about this place suggests water may be a seasonal stream that dried out before fossilizing its guests. That's where things like your little friend would cluster. Water meant insects. Insects meant food. Food meant danger. and danger meant evolution. Evolution in this era was happening faster than most creatures could keep up with. That's the secret people forget. The Triassic wasn't a gentle ramp. It was a treadmill on max speed, and only those who could keep up survived long enough to change. Your lizard didn't dominate the way a lion does today. It dominated like a ghost by being everywhere, slipping through cracks, knowing where the dangers were before the dangers even showed up. It was a template for what dinosaurs would later become, but without the overcompensating bulk. It didn't need to be big. It just needed to be first. Odd fact, some ancient reptiles back then evolved into fish-like shapes and went back to the water. Not our friend here. No. This one stayed on land with legs made for sprinting and a spine tuned like a whip. It stayed in the dust where it could see the whole field. Running, after all, only works if you know when to start. And still, this little ruler had no crown, no subjects, no fanfare. Its kingdom was made of instinct and reaction time. That was enough. You pause beside a larger stone boulder-shaped sun-faded and notice a deep groove across its side. At first glance, it looks like a claw mark. But then you remember this is sediment from a flash flood. That groove. It's from driftwood scraping past an ancient panic, which makes you smile. Because that's the thing. Everything else in this era panicked. Fled, got washed away or buried under ash or eaten before it had a chance to leave a name. But your little tyrant. It kept running, kept showing up in different places, kept making more of itself. That's real power, not domination, persistence. As you walk the trail's edge, the sun drops slightly lower, bathing the desert in gold and blood orange. You wonder what colors it would have seen, what it could have seen. If the theories about color vision are true, this lizard didn't just live in sepia tones, it lived in vivid greens, yellows, maybe even reds, and it used them. For mating, for warnings, for camouflage. That's the final twist. It didn't just survive. It danced. It performed. It carved a throne out of thin air, never needing to be the loudest, just the most present. And as the shadows lengthen across the trackway, the continent without kings suddenly feels like it always had one. You just had to squint to see it. You keep walking, careful not to disturb the fragile edge of the ancient streambed, and soon the world changes beneath your feet. The dust deepens. The scattered prints fade. But something else begins to rise, evidence of the next stage in the lizard's long, chaotic legacy, the age of the archosaurs. No, not dinosaurs yet. Think of this as a family reunion where the relatives don't all get along, but they've inherited the same bony eyebrows and general attitude problems. Archosaurs, or ruling reptiles, were the evolutionary umbrella. Under that umbrella, early crocodilians, pterosaurs, and yes, dinosaurs. But at this point in history, those lines haven't quite hardened. Everyone's still elbowing for space at the evolutionary buffet. You crouch by a broken ridge where sediment layers reveal darker stripes of fossil-rich soil. It's the perfect place to watch the rise of the lizard's larger cousins. One in particular has left claw marks near a rock pile, a primitive predator, maybe Herrerasaurus. About 3 meters long, low-slung, armed with teeth that meant business. A cousin, not a direct descendant, more wolf than lion. Here's what matters. Our tiny lizard is still here. Because while its cousins bulked up and started throwing their weight around, it kept doing what it had always done, skipping between the cracks. And sometimes the cracks are safer than the spotlight. You listen. The forest sounds are back, reimagined in your mind, the deep rustle of cycads in a breeze that carried volcanic ash. The chirr of something insect-like that isn't quite an insect, the hollow bark of something marking territory on a log that's technically 40 million years too early to be a tree frog. It's here in this competition-rich zone that the small lizard's genius really shines. See, most of the archosaurs took the obvious route. Bigger legs, bigger teeth, bigger lungs, but your lizard? It leaned into specialization. It kept its size, but fine-tuned its senses. Maybe it hunted insects others ignored. Maybe it stole food from nests or scavenged in a way that avoided direct confrontation. Historians still debate whether these smaller proto-dinosaurs cooperated socially. Did they warn each other about predators? Did they feed together or nest in groups? There's some fossil clustering that hints at it, but no clear consensus. Still, it's a tantalizing thought, your little tyrant, part of a whispering network of agile tricksters. Odd fact. You know those little lizards you sometimes see in your backyard, the ones that freeze when you spot them, then vanish like magic? That behavior is ancient. Fossilized trackways have shown sudden stops near vertical climbs, and even high-speed turns that suggest ambush-dodging tactics older than birdsong. You step over a slight rise and imagine the larger predators stalking in the underbrush. They had speed, yes, but it was the kind of speed that needed space. They couldn't pivot like your lizard could. They couldn't vanish into a shadow with a single twitch. And while they were outgrowing the forests, the little lizard was mastering them. It didn't rule by winning, it ruled by staying. By now, you're deep in what would have been a Triassic woodland, though. Today, it's just layered shale and sunburnt stone. But imagine it alive. Not towering redwoods. Think gnarled, low trunks. Think ferns waist-high and taller. The canopy's barely closed. The forest floor is patchy with light. And in that light, everything matters. A movement, a sound, a shadow that shouldn't be there. That's where the little lizard thrived. That's where it didn't just survive, it trained. You picture it crouched beside a mossy root cocking its head. A flicker, a rustle, a beetle-shaped snack tiptoeing into range. The strike is so fast it doesn't even feel like movement. 1 second there's tension, the next gone. And it keeps moving. No time for pride. That's the rule. Catch, chew, run. It was an ecosystem without mercy, but not without balance. And your little lizard, let's call it a miniature storm with claws, was part of that balance. Every meal it snatched, every egg it cracked, every leap it made onto a low branch or mossy rock, that was power. A quiet power. The kind that no one notices until it's everywhere. The larger archosaurs didn't mind at first. There was enough space, enough prey, but over time the little lizard's style spread. Descendants, cousins, copycats. Evolution rewards what works, and this design really worked. The body got longer, the hips shifted, some tails stiffened for balance, and suddenly the continent had more runners than it knew what to do with. You place your hand on the rock. It's warm, real, and under your palm millennia ripple. Because this was the moment when one lineage's gamble started to pay off. When tiny turned out to be tactical. When lightness meant longevity. And you wonder, what if this was always the plan? Not dominance, not intimidation, just staying power, just being too fast to lose, too smart to challenge, too small to eat without consequence. So while the archosaurs rose and the early crocodiles gnashed their teeth and pterosaurs stretched their wings to test the sky, your lizard kept its head down, feet moving, eyes open. It would never be the face of a museum exhibit. It wouldn't get statues. It wouldn't be named in playgrounds or blockbuster movies. But make no mistake, it ruled, and the continent. It didn't need a crown. It had speed. It had silence. It had something tiny watching from the shadows. The sun leans low across the cracked hills, and the light begins to flatten the colors of the rock. You trace another set of prints, not from the same lizard, but close. Slightly broader toes, a deeper impression in the heel. You squint. This one was heavier. Still small, still bipedal, but maybe more robust. A cousin, maybe a competitor, maybe dinner. Now your mind rewinds the tape. You see the creature that made the prints come to life, not in dramatic roars or epic clashes, but in a flicker of movement beneath the ferns. It darts forward, tail held stiff for balance, jaws parting in a blink to snatch a leafhopper mid-flight. Then it vanishes. The tail. That's what grabs your attention now. You think about it, a long whip-like appendage, more than half the body length, finely muscled and likely loaded with nerve endings. You imagine it slicing through the air as the lizard cornered a skink or maybe cracked it like a whip to distract a predator. Not every tail was for defense. Sometimes it was for punctuation. And the jaws, nothing fearsome here. No saber teeth or bone-crushing molars, just sleek, tweezer-like snappers made to catch what most animals ignored: beetles, larvae, lizards, tiny hatchlings. That's the real genius. It didn't go after big prey. It went for everything else. And in doing so, it found a niche no one else was flexible or fast enough to exploit. You crouch where the prints vanish beneath a low overhang of eroded stone. The rock smells faintly of rust and silence. Something about this place tells you this lizard spent a lot of its time just out of sight, living in a parallel dimension about 6 inches off the ground, where every rock was a mountain and every crack a canyon. This wasn't a creature that ruled by fear. It ruled by immediacy. It was always the first to arrive, the first to leave. You couldn't catch what you couldn't even follow. You brush your fingers against the stone's edge and think about what that tail might have been capable of. Some paleontologists suggest tails in these early species weren't just stabilizers. They may have acted like primitive rudders or even weapons. One fossilized specimen showed a healed fracture in the tail's midsection, possibly from combat or a close call with something hungry. Historians still debate whether tail slapping was a behavioral trait or a last-ditch effort, but either way, it hints at complexity. These creatures weren't mindless. They had choices, and when your body is mostly tail and legs, you learn to use both well. Odd fact, modern lizards like the basilisk can run short distances on water. Scientists believe their ancestors evolved similar speed-based advantages millions of years ago. So if you're imagining your little tyrant bolting across a flooded forest floor, sending droplets flying in a miniature rooster tail, you're not far off. You feel a breeze curl across your cheek and look up. The sky is empty, but in your mind's eye, the air above the forest blurs with motion-winged insects, early pterosaurs drifting pollen. But down here, just above the soil, the world is in fast forward. The lizard's legs were built like springs, muscles wrapped tightly around hollow bones, just dense enough to take pressure without sacrificing speed. When it launched, it didn't run so much as explode forward. That's how it hunted. That's how it escaped. That's how it lived. You picture the terrain: dry season, cracked mud, sparse leaves. The lizard is hungry. It doesn't have the luxury of resting. So it paces the forest edge, darting in and out of sunlight. Every surface is a potential meal. It tests bark for beetle eggs, darts under a fern for termites, leaps for a wasp, fails, doesn't stop, finds something else. There's a beauty to that hunger. Not desperation, just motion. Like it knew instinctively that standing still was surrender. This was a world where every second mattered. Blink, and you're a footnote. The word predator feels too dramatic for something so small, but it fits. Just not in the way you think. This isn't a lion roaring over a kill. It's a scalpel, a whisper. It trims the ecosystem's edges, keeping everything in check with fast bites and faster exits. And this predator didn't need to see you to get away. It felt the ground. Through its limbs, its tail, maybe even its jaw. Like a living seismograph. You could barely take a step before it was already gone. Another trackway snakes across the stone, this one curving slightly as if the lizard paused mid-run to check something. Maybe it heard a rustle. Maybe it just liked the view. You'll never know. But what you do know is this: its confidence wasn't a bluff. It had no claws worthy of myth, no teeth that would terrify schoolchildren. But it had design, precision, and understanding of how to exist perfectly in a moment. That's what ruled this land. Not size, not strength, function. And that function came in the form of a long tail, delicate jaws, and a mind so finely tuned to movement that it practically was motion. It didn't roar. It didn't pose. It just lived harder, faster, and longer than everything else around it. And sometimes that's more than enough to make you a king. You pause where the canyon deepens, where two slabs of ancient stone lean toward each other like broken pages of a forgotten book. The trail of tracks vanishes here, but you know better than to think the story stops. The forest may be gone, turned to stone and silence, but you can still feel it. Not above, but beneath. Underfoot, under leaves, long crumbled into memory, the empire of the tiny lizard stretched like a hidden web. It was never about open ground. The real kingdom was underneath the tangle of roots, rot, and whispering insects. That's where the lizard ruled best. You imagine ducking down to its level, pressing your cheek to the soil, seeing what it saw. A world not shaped by horizon lines, but by vertical inches. Twisted fern roots like towers, burrows like tunnels. A dropped seed pod becomes a mountain pass. A beetle becomes both enemy and meal. Down here, the lizard isn't prey. It's a shadow. A flash of motion through dappled darkness. No footprints, just the slight tremble of fronds left swaying in its wake. It navigates with something more than sight, maybe pressure, maybe echo, maybe just very, very good guesses. Scientists argue about just how deep these micro-predators operated. Were they surface skimmers only darting below when chased? Or did they live almost entirely in the gloom, feeding and nesting in the tangled mess just above the water table? Historians still debate whether early dinosaurs were primarily burrowers or only opportunistic hiders. The fossil record isn't generous to creatures that lived in holes. But here's what we do know: in soil samples rich with insect nests, we also find strange claw scrapes. Patterns that repeat. Patterns that match the foot structure of these early runners. Some paleontologists believe they didn't just hide here, they hunted here, built their homes, even raised their young. You walk carefully across the stone shelf. In your mind, it's mossy, damp, alive with movement too fast to register. The lizard isn't the biggest thing down here, but it's the one most in control. That's the trick. Control without dominance, presence without noise. It likely had a territory, not marked in the way mammals might, but through scent trails, paths worn smooth by hundreds of tiny steps and perhaps the remains of 100 discarded insect wings. That's how it said, "This is mine." And it probably defended it. Maybe not through epic battles, but through speed displays, flares of bright color tail movements, chirping calls. Picture a creature standing tall, not tall to you, but tall to its own kind, flaring the proto-feathers on its back, making a sound like someone clicking their tongue rapidly. A warning, a boast, a bluff. You smile at the idea. The forest floor wasn't silent. It was just pitched in a register too low for the fossil record to hear. Odd fact, some modern lizards can detach their tails to escape a predator. Paleontologists believe this adaptation dates back to the Triassic. If so, then your little ruler could choose to leave a piece of itself behind to survive. That's more than instinct. That's negotiation with fate. And the terrain down here wasn't just made of dirt, it shifted constantly. Floods, droughts, tree falls, ash rains from distant eruptions. Every week, the entire underworld rewrote itself. And yet, the lizard stayed. Not just survived, thrived. There's something poetic about that. A creature so tied to motion, to instability, making its kingdom in the most unstable layer of the world. That's courage. Or maybe just incredible reflexes. You step into a slight dip in the rock shaped like a shallow basin. In the Triassic, this might have been a wallow, a muddy depression, where humidity lingered even in the dry season. Perfect for bugs, perfect for footprints, perfect for ambush. And there it is, a single partial print. 3 toes barely visible, the middle one deeper, suggesting a quick push-off, an exit. You're standing where it stood only seconds before it vanished into leaf and shadow. You can't help but grin. Because you can feel it watching you. Not literally, of course, but spiritually. That energy, that awareness, that ceaseless readiness to move. It didn't need dominance. It didn't need mass. It needed a few square feet of quiet, a pulse of hunger, and the sudden decision to act. And in that decision, every single time it won. So while other creatures evolved into dead ends, while larger predators vanished with every extinction pulse, your little emperor lived on. Not unchanged, but unmistakable. Because it never forgot where it came from. The darkness under the leaves, the hush of dirt, the empire that never raised its voice. You stand still a while longer, letting the wind pass. The rock is warm beneath you. The canyon is quiet again, but if you really listen, you can almost hear it. A rustle, a twitch, a flicker of tail and intention. Still there. Still waiting. The heat hits your face again as you rise from the shadow of the stone basin. But something else draws your eye now, a line of gouged tracks more deliberate, deeper, wider spacing. You follow them across the rock and find the culprit in your mind's eye before the science catches up. Not your little tyrant. This one's bulkier, heavier, armored. Imagine a reptile so covered in bony scales it looks like it crawled out of a nightmare designed by someone with a nail fetish. Short legs, low center of gravity, and jaws made more for pulling than biting. Not a predator, not fast, but relentless. This is the worm thief, the rival. It's not often mentioned in the flashy documentaries. No sharp claws, no dramatic kills, but in the Triassic food economy, this thing was an industrial competitor. It didn't chase, it cleared. Roots, fungus, worms, burrowed grubs, it combed through the underbrush like a living bulldozer. Slow, yes, but thorough. And always hungry. Your lizard. Lightning fast, nimble, and tactical. This one? It wins by existing where it's not welcome. By taking its time and ignoring threats unless they bite it directly, and even then, it's not impressed. The tracks you see wider set toes drag marks near the midline show where it plodded forward unconcerned, probably following a scent trail or the soft sigh of damp leaf litter where worms might hide. And now you're picturing the showdown. Your little lizard perched on a mound tail, flicking head bobbing like it's offended. The worm thief just keeps coming. Not aggressive, just indifferent. Like someone entering the express checkout line with 60 items and no shame. The lizard tries to intimidate color flare tail whip, even a quick dash in front of the armored bulk. But the rival doesn't blink. Literally. Its eyes are protected by ridged bone. It's a tank with legs. And this frustrates your ruler. Because everything else runs. Everything else reacts. But not this one. Historians still debate whether these armored reptiles, possibly early etiosaurs, directly competed with small carnivores. But fossil sites do show their remains tangled in the same layers. Some even bear bite marks, possibly from being tested as food or during territorial disputes. It's unclear if those encounters were accidents or lessons learned. You circle the footprint again, this time comparing it to the sharper, cleaner prints of your lizard. One is a signature of grace. The other, a boot print in the mud of history. It's hard not to admire the stubbornness. Odd fact, some modern armadillos can hold their breath for 6 minutes and walk underwater to avoid predators. Their ancient armored cousins may have had similar tricks. Not deep divers, but perhaps capable of enduring longer in burrows or mud puddles, hunkering down instead of running away. You imagine the lizard learning this the hard way. Darting at the creature, expecting panic and getting nothing, just a slow chewing head turn and a blink that says, "You done yet?" And yet this rivalry didn't end in battle. There were no epic duels, no slow-motion clashes under the setting sun. Just friction, resource overlap. The push and pull of evolution where even the tiniest lizard had to adjust, replan, and maybe find dinner somewhere else. That's what makes it fascinating. Your little ruler was adaptable, but so was the worm thief in its own boring armor-plated way. They were two philosophies of survival, one based on speed, the other on stubbornness. And that tells you something essential about this time. This wasn't a world of straight lines, it wasn't a ladder of dominance. It was a web. A messy, twitching web where being fast helped, but so did being too tough to bother with. And the lizard, for all its brilliance, had to acknowledge that. Maybe it avoided them from then on. Maybe it learned to read their scent and gave them space. Or maybe it got bolder, using its speed to nip at their flanks, test their blind spots, tease them just for fun. You wouldn't put it past it. You climb higher now, where the rock opens into a flat plateau. From here, the fossilized stream beds sprawl below like veins. And in your mind, you can see both creatures in motion. One, a flash, a blade of instinct, slicing through the foliage. The other, a slow, armored statement carving a path just by refusing to stop. It's not a fight scene, it's a dance. One full of grudges, detours, and learning. Your lizard didn't have the continent to itself. It had rivals, blockers, question marks, and yet it endured. Because even in the face of stubborn, scale-plated, worm-eating obstinance, it never stood still. It moved around, over, through, and when needed, it waited. That, in the end, is a different kind of intelligence. Knowing when to run, and knowing when the best move is simply not to waste your time. Because there's always another hill, another meal, another moment to own, and your little tyrant. It had plenty of those left. The air shifts again. You can feel the heat bleeding off the stone as evening begins to stretch across the prehistoric scene you're walking through in your mind. The sky's turning that soft amber that always makes things feel just a bit more ancient. You squint up, and for a moment you imagine the forest canopy overhead. Not today's jungle, but a patchwork of strange trees, broad ferns, and cone-bursting plants that smelled like soap and decay. And somewhere in that tangled mess, your little lizard is doing something miraculous. It's staying warm. Now, that might not sound dramatic, but at a time when the nights dropped fast and the warmth didn't always return in the morning, keeping your body temperature stable was about as advanced as inventing fire. And this creature, it didn't have fur. It didn't build fires. But it had strategies. You kneel beside a natural stone bowl, probably once a shallow nest or low-lying hollow. The sediment tells you this was once part of the forest floor and it was sunlit, which means one thing: thermal banking. That's right. Your little tyrant was a miniature physicist. During the day, it would warm itself on sun-baked stones or dark leaves. Not just basking like a modern lizard, but actively storing heat like it knew it would need it later. Then, as night fell, it curled up in those hollows pressed against those heated surfaces and rode the thermal decay like a sleeping bag from the Mesozoic. Historians still debate whether early dinosaurs were warm-blooded or cold-blooded, or if they occupied some in-between metabolic space. But your tiny ruler, it might have been one of the first to blur that line. Not quite warm-blooded, but definitely warm-smart. And when that wasn't enough, it had another trick. You crouch lower, eyes tracing a line in the rock, deep, narrow, and curved. A scratch made not by claws, but by repeated contact. Something nested here, repeatedly, likely dragging plant matter insulating itself. Ancient air conditioning meets prehistoric insulation. Odd fact, modern birds that nest in leaf piles can raise the temperature of their eggs by over 10 degrees Celsius. And some reptiles do the same, using composting vegetation to incubate or stay warm. Now imagine your lizard dragging in mouthfuls of soft moss, wilted fronds, and drying leaves into a shaded nook. Not for decoration, not even for nesting, just to stay warm, to trap the heat it stole from the day. You smile because this changes the narrative again. It's not just fast, not just clever, it's adaptive. You see it now. After dusk, the forest grows silent, except for the slow clicks of distant insects. The big predators are settling into night blindness, still tied to the day. But your lizard, It's still moving, not boldly but carefully. Eyes wide, breath slow. Its warmth allows it a few more moments of speed, one more snack before sleep, one more look around, one more patrol of its territory. And when it finally settles, it does something else unexpected. It only half sleeps. One hemisphere of its brain stays active. One eye cracked open, tail still twitching, muscles coiled under its belly. It's not a conscious decision, not really. It's just how it's wired. Because in a world where every noise could be a death sentence, sleep isn't about rest. It's about reduction. Less exposure, not vulnerability. Some modern birds and reptiles share this trick: unihemispheric slow-wave sleep. They nap with half their brain still awake. It's not restful in the human sense, but it works. You don't get caught. You wake when you need to, and you live another day. So your little lizard, now a seasoned survivor, is curled in its hollow, stealing heat from leaves and rock, resting one eye while the other watches the dark. It's not heroic. It's not glamorous. It's genius. And as you walk through the imagined landscape, you realize something else. Every one of these behaviors, thermal strategy, cautious sleep, nocturnal awareness, it's not just survival, it's planning. This isn't a reactive creature. This is proactive, strategic, not because it's a philosopher, but because evolution carved every advantage into its body. And what did it cost? Nothing. It was small, so it didn't need much. It was quick, so it didn't need to fight. It was clever, so it didn't need to risk. And now as the Triassic night falls across the plains, and the wind whistles low across the fossil beds, you see the truth: it didn't dominate through strength. It outlasted. That's the ultimate flex. While others chased and roared and postured, your lizard moved like a ghost, warm, ready, half asleep, and always thinking 2 steps ahead. And really, how do you defeat something like that? You don't. You just get left behind. You step carefully over a weather-worn ridge, the stone beneath your feet still warm from the sun. But night has fully fallen in your mind's reconstruction of this ancient world. The leaves gleam wet with condensation. The stars are just now peeking through the volcanic haze of the Triassic sky, and somewhere nearby, just a few arms' lengths away in that pocket of time, a small creature refuses to sleep for long. You hear it before you see it. A soft rustle, a claw against bark, a faint exhale like a sneeze muffled into fur. Except it's not fur. It's something else. Maybe proto-feathers, maybe nothing more than skin with patches of fine sensory filaments. But either way, it's on alert. Because your little tyrant doesn't trust the dark. Not fully, and why should it? This is the moment of maximum vulnerability. No sun to steal heat from. No leaves to rustle in warning. No shadows to cast, only blackness and movement. And the predators that favor blackness and movement have always been a problem. But here's where the lizard's design shines again. You crouch beside what may have been a burrow entrance ringed with mineralized traces of claw marks and compressed sediment. The size is right small enough to exclude anything larger than a squirrel, but long enough to hide a miniature storm. The trick isn't that your lizard hides here, it's that it doesn't stay here for long. Because it can't sleep. Not really. Its eyes close and turns one, then the other. Its brain slips into rest one hemisphere at a time. Half alert, half dreaming. And while one half drifts into recovery, the other listens, watches, remembers. Some modern reptiles and birds still do this. Crocodiles on riverbanks, ducks floating in lines, each one watching the outer edge. It's not true rest, it's survival with a rhythm. Historians still debate whether these ancient lizards evolved this trait before or after birds split from the main dinosaur family tree. But fossil evidence suggests that even the earliest theropods had unusually large optic lobes, parts of the brain linked to visual processing and alertness. Your lizard curled in the leaf mold is more than just twitchy. It's wired for perpetual readiness. And in a world where predators didn't need to roar to be deadly, that meant everything. Odd fact, some modern geckos can detect ultraviolet light even in darkness. It's possible that your lizard's eyes, enormous in proportion to its skull, weren't just sensitive to movement, they were tuned to invisible parts of the spectrum. To it, the forest at night may have shimmered faintly, not black, but glowing. You stand still and imagine it slipping from its burrow's soft feet touching damp soil, head tilting side to side as it scans. Not for opportunity, not even for food, just to know. Every shape memorized, every scent cataloged, every new rustle filed away. And it moves like a wisp of light so fast and deliberate that the world seems to bend around it. Not to chase, not to flee, just to shift its position from here to safer than here. It was never about distance. It was about placement. It navigates by instinct, sure, but also by something more. Pattern recognition. It remembers where the beetles hide, where the moss stays warmer, where that one slow-moving predator sleeps too deeply to matter. And in this half-sleeping, quarter-lit forest, your little ruler stalks like a whisper with legs. Now picture it during a storm. Because yes, even then it doesn't stop. Rain hammers the canopy, the temperature drops, water pools, insects burrow deeper. But your lizard doesn't freeze. Instead, it tucks itself into its hollow, wraps its body tight in a spiral and shifts its metabolism. Slower heartbeat, less movement. But not sleep. Never true sleep. It listens to the storm the way you might listen to music you're trying to ignore. Half-focused, waiting for the part that means danger. And when the rain stops, it's already moving. Because that's when the world resets. That's when insects crawl out again. When leaves drip and puddles rise and everything makes more noise than it should. And for a brief window, being awake means you get there first. You watch it dart out across mossy roots over a slick stone into a thicket. A beetle is gone. Then a grub. Then a blink, and it's vanished again. Not because it had to, because it chose to. Because even in the quiet it doesn't settle. Because stillness is dangerous. You step back, letting the image fade. The rock around you is empty again. The night has long since claimed the forest, and whatever was once here is now a memory etched into stone and imagination. But you can still feel it. That sense that something small, twitchy, and half asleep might still be watching, waiting. Not because it fears you, because it knows something you don't. That the ones who move first, who sleep in slivers and wake without sound, don't just survive, they outlast. The dawn returns soft and gold, and the rock beneath your feet begins to warm again. Not quickly. It takes its time, just like everything did back then. Except your lizard. That one never waited for warmth to catch up. It was already moving before the sun knew where to rise. But today is different, because today it slips. You come across a stretch of sediment not yet eroded by wind or worn by feet, and right there, like a fossil photograph, a smear. Not a graceful track, not a rhythmic trail of perfect little feet, just chaos. A body-sized gouge, a scuffed tail mark, a sudden stop, and then nothing. You kneel, study it. This isn't a print, it's a mistake. Something caught it. Or rather, something made it forget to run. You close your eyes and imagine the moment. It was chasing something, likely a bug, maybe a hatchling of another species. There was food ahead, noise behind, maybe both. And for the briefest flicker of time it hesitated. Misjudged the slope, the mud sucked at its foot. And that's when the ground gave out, not a predator, not a fight, a landslide, a flash flood, a wall of mud that rolled down from the higher slope and swallowed it whole. Fossils of creatures like your lizard are rarely found whole. They were too light, too quick, too clever. But when they're found, it's usually like this. Caught mid-motion, trapped in something they couldn't predict. Volcano ash, sudden mudslides, a bog that looked solid until it didn't. Historians still debate whether we underestimate how many species never fossilized simply because their bodies were built not to leave a trace. Hollow bones, minimal mass, no dramatic deaths near mineral-rich water. In other words, being too fast to die in the right place means we barely remember you. Odd fact, the best preserved fossils of small dinosaurs often come from ancient lake beds that dried just long enough to trap a few unlucky creatures before filling again, like nature setting up a hidden camera and hoping someone tripped. And someone did. Your lizard. It skidded here, maybe flailed, maybe tried to twist around and use that whip-like tail to anchor itself, but the mud didn't care. It pulled, it pressed, it preserved, but only because the creature failed to escape. And even that failures is beautiful. Because in that moment, it left behind something no one else did, a mark. Not of domination, not of triumph, just of presence. Proof that something this fast existed. You lean closer. See the faint edges of the ribcage pressed into the sediment. The spine curled unnaturally, the tail whipped around like a question mark. It wasn't trying to die, it was trying not to. And that tells you more than any complete skeleton could. This was a life spent in motion. Every muscle, every instinct honed for fractions of seconds. A lifetime of escaping hunting, hiding mating, all packed into something smaller than a sneaker. And still it wasn't enough. Because sometimes the world moves faster than even the fastest. You stand up, brushing dust from your hands, and glance around. The stone here is quiet. No signs of other predators, no bones nearby. Just this one moment frozen in deep time. The fossil of a flinch. And it hits you gently but undeniably. This isn't tragedy, it's tribute. The lizard ruled not because it lasted forever, but because it almost did. Because it lived so fast, so lightly, so cleverly that it barely left a trace until the one time it didn't. This is how you make history sometimes. Not through crowns or kills or towering bones, but through a mistake. Through a single instant where everything you were, motion speed instinct, wasn't enough. And that failure becomes the story. That moment becomes the legacy. And now, millions of years later, you're here, staring at the echo of something small, fast, and ancient. A creature that outran everything except the mudslide it didn't see coming. And somehow even that feels like a kind of win. Because we're still talking about it. You're still here. And in the end, maybe that's the real mark of a ruler. Not how long you reigned, but how long your shadow lingers. You leave the stone hollow behind, the fossilized skid still clear in your mind. But something new catches your attention now, a fan of footprints oddly arranged, almost choreographed. They don't lead in a straight line. They spiral, overlap, pause, dart. You tilt your head. This wasn't running. It was dancing. You smile, because even in the prehistoric dark, some things never change. Courtship. Right here, right in this shallow, trampled patch of sediment, your tiny lizard put on a show. Not with roars or antlers or perfume, but with feet, feathers, flashes, and rhythm. And there, just at the edge, you find the second set of prints. Smaller, more delicate, paused, then gone. A watcher, a witness, the audience of one. This was a performance. Historians still debate whether early theropods used visual displays in mating rituals, the same way modern birds do, but the signs are compelling. In large tail bases, vivid skeletal crests, stiffened feathers that might have shimmered in sunlight. Some even believe early species thumped the ground in a pattern, less roar, more EDM. Odd fact, the modern mannequin bird moonwalks during its mating ritual. Seriously, tiny bird, perfect moonwalk. So imagine what a tiny dinosaur with flexible joints and oversized feet might have tried. Your lizard, you realize, didn't just survive, it expressed. It didn't grunt and chase. It performed. It flaunted its balance, its agility, its color. Maybe it lifted its tail and quivered like a twig in a breeze. Maybe it hopped in little bursts, drawing spirals in the soil. Not to intimidate, to impress. You crouch again, studying the spacing of the tracks. They didn't start close. The second set hovered at a distance, curious, wary. But as the performance continued, they crept inward, a few steps at a time. Each pause matching a moment of stillness in the show. A pause, a tail flick, a spin, closer. The courtship dance of these tiny lizards may have looked ridiculous to us, less ballet, more twitchy toddler energy. But to them, it was poetry. Risky, flamboyant, unguarded poetry. Because if you danced too hard, predators saw you. If you danced too long, you starved. But if you danced just right, you didn't dance alone. And sometimes the performance brought more than just a mate. You step back to take in the wider view. Here around the spiraled tracks are drag marks, heavy, sudden, not from your lizard, from the audience. No, not the romantic partner, the accidental one. Something big, something with teeth, something drawn to movement. Because in this quiet land of ancient shadows, performance wasn't private. It echoed. It rippled. It called things you didn't want, a predator probably. One that waited until the show was nearly over. And when the pair had drawn close, when the distance had narrowed, when trust had bloomed, that's when it struck. But not fast enough. You can tell from the tracks. The scatter is messy, but both sets sprint away. Opposite directions. Long bounds. A leap. A slide. They escaped. Barely. And maybe they met again. Or maybe that was the last dance they'd ever try. That's the gamble of expression. It makes you visible. It makes you real. But it also means you're alive. And what's a life without a little performance? Even among the trees of a forgotten age, with death waiting behind every fern, your lizard risked everything for a show. It didn't just eat, sleep, and scurry. It declared itself. Here I am, fast, alive, wanting. You can't help but admire it, because in that declaration is a different kind of rule. Not of territory, not of dominance, but of presence. A footprint isn't a throne, but in the right shape, in the right sequence, under the right light, it might as well be. The world shakes, not in metaphor, not in memory, in real, blistering, world-ending silence. You look up. Your imagined sky is burning, not red, not orange, wrong. The kind of color that doesn't belong in any atmosphere, not even a prehistoric one. Something's falling, something's coming. And every creature that ever called this continent home is already moving, except the ones too big, too proud, or too late. You already know what this is, the meteor, the cataclysm, the end of everything we usually care about when we say dinosaurs. But here's the twist, the little lizard didn't die. You blink, you look around. The smoke hasn't cleared. The ash still reigns. The global ovens still baking the planet one volcano breath at a time. But beneath a twisted root half sheltered by a collapsed fern tree and a layer of lucky mud, something stirs. A tail, a flicker, a heartbeat so small it almost misses the moment. It lived because it could. And that makes all the difference. Historians still debate whether the mass extinction event at the end of the Cretaceous, yes, that big one had smaller predecessors. One theory suggests there were practice extinctions. Pulses of die-off before the big curtain fall. Regional collapses triggered by volcanoes, climate shifts, sea level changes. And in one of those mini-apocalypses, a lot of giants fell. Large species vanished. Ecosystems collapsed. But not your little lizard. It didn't need much, not food, not territory, not comfort, just shelter, just instinct, just speed. You crouch beside a narrow gap in the fossil bed, an old root channel likely connected to a massive tree that's long since decayed into myth. In the days following the impact or one like it, this would have been a lifeboat, a cool, dark, quiet haven. The lizard doesn't understand extinction. It only understands move or die. And it does. It drinks condensation off leaves, eats the last of the surviving beetles, waits out the first toxic rains. When the forest above collapses in flame and heat, it's already burrowed. When ash darkens the sun, it slows its metabolism, moves less, thinks more. Odd fact, some desert reptiles today can survive for weeks on almost no food, simply absorbing ambient moisture and shifting to energy-saving states. It's possible the ancestors of your lizard had already mastered this long before mammals got their act together. You imagine its heartbeat slowing, its breath steady, its eyes wide and ancient, watching the world end through a narrow slit in the soil. And when it emerges days, weeks, maybe months later, it finds silence. No giants, no noise. Just the skeletons of a world that forgot how to be small. And that's where the miracle happens. Because survival in this moment isn't just an accident, it's a victory of scale. The little lizard didn't escape the apocalypse, it ignored it. It slipped beneath it, darted between the cracks, adapted faster than fear could reach it. And when the sun finally returned, weak and orange filtered through poisoned air and devastated trees, the lizard stepped out not as prey, not as a leftover, but as a beginning. A living relic that carried its story into the next age. The others. They had names, they had fame, but they're gone. And this one waited. Waited, then sprinted. Hid, then hunted. Slept with one eye open while the sky collapsed. And now it's here, still tiny, still twitchy, still suspicious of everything, but alive. You stare out across the imaginary ash plains. Nothing stirs. Not yet. But somewhere in the soil, something scratches. Something ancient. Something very, very fast. The world is quiet, now unnaturally so. The trees are fewer. The light is strange, and the air carries the sour memory of ash long settled. But life, being what it is, refuses to give up entirely. And just when you think the silence will last forever, the ground trembles. You feel it in your knees. Low, rhythmic, distant. Boom, boom, boom. Something big has returned. From the newly formed horizon lumbers a shape that breaks the sky. Long necktail like a swinging bridge, legs like columns. A sauropod. One of the giants born into this new world like a child wearing its parents' clothes. The megafauna are back, slower this time, more cautious, but still huge enough to cast shadows that span entire forests. You could be forgiven for thinking your lizard is finally outmatched. But you would be wrong. Because while these towering creatures reclaim the middle of the continent, trampling paths into memory, and chewing through reborn vegetation, your little tyrant is already under them. Dashing between their ankles, raiding their nests, snatching insects from their droppings. You smile, imagining it now a sauropod mother, massive and slow, carefully arranging her eggs in a broad pit. She lumbers off to feed her head, rising like a periscope among the trees. And somewhere nearby in a shadow just wide enough for a creature the size of a flashlight, he waits. Your lizard doesn't challenge the giants. He doesn't need to. He uses them. Their size creates space. Their waste draws bugs. Their movement carves clearings. And most importantly, their eggs are only guarded for part of the day. Historians still debate whether early small theropods were obligate scavengers or opportunistic omnivores. But stomach content fossils. Yes, those exist to show traces of shelled protein. And in ecosystems where giants reign, the smart eat around the edges. Odd fact, modern Komodo dragons will trail nesting sea turtles just to feast on the abandoned eggs. And they do it with uncanny timing. Why wouldn't your lizard do the same? You can picture him now, belly pressed low to the warm ground tongue, flicking for scent, waiting for the soft grunt of distance from a sauropod. Then pounce. A few quick scrapes, a gulp of raw history, gone before the shadow returns. Not just surviving the age of giants, thriving in it. And the best part? The giants don't even notice. Because size means sluggishness, delay, confidence. Your lizard. He's all nerves and calculations. He doesn't waste time feeling guilty or grateful. He eats and goes. The ecosystem reborn from apocalypse has settled into new rhythms. And while most creatures are still figuring it out, your little ruler is already ahead of the curve. Because he never stopped, while others pause to mourn the world that was he just adapted. Faster legs, sharper eyes, maybe brighter colors. Some even theorize small dinosaurs began to shift their patterns in this era more showy, more distinct. Not for camouflage, but communication. After all, when you're darting around giant feet and stealing bites of egg yolk, it helps if your friends can spot you. You crouch beside a cluster of rounded stones, unmistakable fossilized eggs. One is cracked open, the shell pattern telling a story. Jagged split, no signs of hatching. The embryo long gone, probably eaten, and just near it a faint line, a trail. Not a clear footprint, but a smear. The size is right, the direction is clear. He was here. While the dinosaurs above moved like titans, this one ruled the underworld. The margins, the corners, the places no one else thought to guard. The kingdom of the giants belonged to those who looked up. But the kingdom under them, that was his. And in that quiet space between the booming footfalls and the forgotten nests, he carved his legend. Not with strength, with access. He saw what others ignored. He took what others couldn't reach. He survived what others couldn't imagine. And as you stand again, the ground still humming from the retreating herd, you realize something essential. The lizard didn't just survive the return of giants. He never flinched. He looked up at the thunder, blinked once, and moved faster. Because when you've already outlived extinction, what's a little dinosaur with a long neck? Nothing but another tall distraction. The land fractures now, not in memory but in geography. You blink and Pangea is no more. The supercontinent splits like an old dinner plate dropped in slow motion. Tectonic drift tearing through ancient seams, carving new oceans, scattering forests like confetti. And your little lizard. He's not just watching from a distance, he's on board. You kneel beside a strange line in the rock, a ripple pattern shallow and fossilized. It looks like nothing unless you know what to see. The imprint of driftwood. Long sun-bleached bark stripped hollowed by insects and heat. And along its edge, tiny claw marks, faint, uneven, directional. You grin. He floated. That's the story here. A storm, a flood, a sudden river forming where no river had been. A clump of branches breaking free and bobbing into the current. And on it, clinging not in panic but with stubborn, bug-eyed optimism, your lizard. He didn't build a raft, but he used one. Drifted, floated, landed, and when the currents threw him against a different shore, what did he do? He kept going. Scientists once believed continental drift happened too slowly for creatures to cross between landmasses after they'd separated. But fossil records have changed that thinking. Small species, especially adaptable ones, somehow made it across vast stretches of sea. Maybe on land bridges, maybe on mats of debris. Maybe just like this. Odd fact, modern green iguanas have colonized new islands after hurricanes by floating across the sea on storm-tossed vegetation. It's not just luck, it's opportunity. And your little ruler. He didn't see the ocean as a barrier. He saw it as an expressway. Historians still debate whether small theropods independently evolved on different continents or if a single common ancestor spread before the land broke apart. But the timeline's messy. And then you find prints like these mismatched, isolated but familiar. A claw here, a tail drag there, and in places that should have been unreachable, but weren't. Because your lizard didn't stay put. Why would he? His entire existence was built on movement. Avoid the hot, find the shade, eat the small, leave before the big arrives. That kind of logic works on any continent. So he traveled, by foot, by flood, by accident, and every time he landed somewhere new, he didn't start over. He started faster. In South America, he danced under cycads. In Africa, he sprinted through fern fields. In what would become India, he nested in volcanic soil. In Antarctica, yes, even there he moved during the warm phases, burrowing just deep enough to miss the freeze. Everywhere he went, he fit in. Because his rule wasn't about changing the land, it was about changing himself. You crouch beside another fossil track, this one recently unearthed on a windswept slope where the sea once lapped a primeval beach. It's nearly identical to the ones you saw days ago continents away, and you laugh. Because there he is again. Same pace, same print depth, same arrogance. He didn't rule a continent, he ruled all of them. By not needing any of them for long, no territory, no capital, just an empire of footprints. And no one remembers who came after. Because the giants got trapped by size, the armored ones by speed, the flyers by sky. But the one who floated, he kept finding places no one else could reach. No plan. Just a perfectly tuned instinct for the moment when the world changed and the momentum to leap before the crack closed. You glance at the sea. It's calm now. But you know better, because the one who ruled it never swam. He rode it. The wind today is soft, almost uncertain as you stand on the edge of a cliff that once looked out over ancient swampland. Below the stone has captured time in gentle layers, gray copper ochre, each one a quiet echo of an age. And nestled between them is something easy to overlook, a single perfect footprint. You've seen hundreds by now. You could sketch them from memory, but this one feels different. Older, yes, but not in a way that speaks of time. Older in attitude, it's lighter, shallower, precise. And you realize this is near the end of his story, not the end of his kind. The lineage continued, branched, adapted. But him, the original idea, the tiny emperor with the lightning legs and the suspicious eyes, his time is passing. And yet he's still walking. Because here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Size never ruled this world. He did. Not because he was stronger, but because he lasted. You sit beside the print, tracing the toe impressions with your fingers. The edges are sharp, undistorted by weather. A snapshot, a signature, a whisper. He never left a skull behind. No full skeleton, no fossilized nest, just a trail of perfectly timed exits. And yet we know he was here, because what he did remains. Historians still debate whether species like his shaped the entire evolutionary pathway that led to birds, or whether they were evolutionary side roads, clever and quick, but ultimately cul-de-sacs. But then you find this, not buried, not broken, just standing in place, a single moment of stillness. You picture him there just before moving on, tail lifted, head tilted, eyes locked on the horizon, not looking back, because there was nothing left to prove. Odd fact, certain desert lizards today perform brief ritualistic stillness, not camouflage, not fear, a moment of balance, temperature control, ground reading, a pause not of confusion but of intent. That's what this print says. Not hesitation, just composure. After all this time, all this running, all this darting between legs and continents and survival strategies, he simply paused, not to rest, to mark the moment, to remind the world that power doesn't roar, and legacy doesn't need a skeleton in a museum. Sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is be small, smart, and everywhere. And you realize something else. He never needed to be remembered, because forgetting him was impossible. Every fast twitch in a bird's leg, every sidelong glance from a lizard perched on a wall, every heartbeat that whispers go now instead of wait. That's him. That's the myth of size and power unraveling in the presence of precision and will. You watch the horizon one more time. If he were here, he'd already be gone. And you wouldn't even know he passed by except for the echo under your feet. The one that keeps saying you don't have to be big to leave a mark. You follow a shallow wash through the rocks where the wind has carefully swept away centuries of dust without quite erasing the stories beneath. And in this quiet fold of stone and time, something stops you. A print. No fanfare. No cluster. Just one. Small, sharp, unmistakable. You kneel beside it. The sun drifts behind a haze of prehistoric memory, and suddenly it feels like the beginning again. But this is the end. Not of the world. Not even of the species. Just the moment where his story fades from motion into myth. There's no sign of struggle here. No scramble. No fall. Just one last step perfectly formed pressed into what was once damp earth and is now dry as bone. And then, nothing. He didn't die here. He vanished. That's the magic of it, of him. No bones to arrange on a museum mount. No skull in a drawer. No feathered imprint to analyze. Just a claw mark, a footprint, a few tooth-scraped shells, and all of it whispering one phrase, I was here. And I moved on. Historians still debate whether such species truly disappeared or if they simply changed beyond recognition, melted into the lineage of something new. Birds. Maybe. Modern reptiles possibly. But one thing remains unchanged. The pattern of that gait, that pause and sprint, that twitchy, calculated rhythm that belonged to something built for a world where waiting meant dying. And so when everything around it slowed, when the forest shifted, the continents drifted further, the predators changed shape. He didn't resist. He stepped around it. Everywhere and nowhere. In Australia, faint prints matching his size appear beside larger, unrelated species like graffiti, scribbled behind someone else's monument. In North America, shards of eggshells hint at his kind nesting in places mammals had already started to dominate. In Asia, fragments of claw marks suggest last-minute meals, last-second dashes, always at the edge of discovery, always almost gone. And eventually he was, but not forgotten. Because this is the strange joke the fossil record plays. You can leave behind an entire skeleton and be ignored. Or you can leave just enough a whisper, a smudge, a heartbeat in stone, and be remembered forever. And here he is at the end of it. A creature smaller than a loaf of bread, faster than a blink, smarter than he had any right to be. He didn't own the land. He didn't roar. He didn't even stay. But for tens of millions of years, he ran this continent and everyone after that, by being invisible in plain sight. Odd fact, some ancient insects left more fossils than he did. More wings, more shells, more evidence. But no one tells stories about them. Because they didn't rule anything. He did. And now, as the light fades for real, and the shadows stretch like old bones across the rock, you stand over that final print. You trace it one last time. Then let the wind take it. And as it blurs into dust, the voice inside you says the thing you've been building toward all along. He didn't need to be seen. He only needed to last, and that's exactly what he did. In the deepest past, long before tyrants roared and giants stomped across continents, there was a creature no bigger than your hand, a small, nimble lizard whose name no one remembers but whose legacy never faded. You followed his trail through time, stone, and silence. He wasn't strong. He wasn't loud. But he was faster than danger, smarter than extinction, and quieter than the history books knew how to handle. He danced beneath ferns, hunted beneath giants, and warmed himself on sun-baked stone. He slept with one eye open, lived through fire and ash, and rode driftwood between newborn continents like an accidental explorer. He never conquered with teeth or size. He survived with speed, instinct, and timing. And when the meteors fell and the night stretched long, he didn't panic. He waited, then moved. In the story of life where the loudest often burn out and the biggest fall hardest, he whispered his way across ages and in doing so, outlived them all. A footprint here, a scratch there, a line in the mud that doesn't belong. That's his crown. That's his throne. And now you know what to look for. Not the bones, not the fossils, just the shadows and the silence that moves too fast to catch.